Welcome back. We're live for another cozy Brother Grimm sleepy time. Maybe some Hans Andersen. Maybe some other stuff. Who knows? We'll see where the night takes us. But for now, we're just trying to get cozy, read some stories, get a little sleepy, get a little relaxed, take some stress away. I have the pages up from last night. We'll wait for some requests to come in. But in the meantime, I'll find something to get us started. Let me see. I'm a little sick tonight. I think a lot of people in this part of the country are sick tonight. It seems to be going around. Just a cold. But I know a lot of other people are feeling sick tonight too. Maybe it's a new COVID, who knows? But hopefully I'll be over it soon. Alright. Let me know if I'm ever too quiet or too loud. I'm gonna go ahead and put some music on for us before we get started. Yeah, thank you. I'll try to feel better soon. Thank you. Can we hear this? I'll turn it down a little bit. How's the noise on that? Too loud, too quiet? Let me put it to right about... Okay, what's that? I think that should be good. Can we hear the music chat? Is it coming through okay? How's the music? Okay. The Wedding of Mrs. Fox? No, we read that one last time. The music is good. Okay, good. You like the music? How about the volume? Let me know about the volume if it's too loud or too quiet. Let's do the Gold Children. This one is the Gold Children. There was once a poor man and a poor woman who had nothing but a little cottage, and who earned their bread by fishing, and always lived from hand to mouth. But it came to pass one day, when the man was sitting by the waterside and casting his net, that he drew out a fish entirely of gold. Turn it down a little. Alright, that's a bit better. As he was looking at the fish, full of astonishment, it began to speak, and said, "Hark you, fisherman, if you will throw me back again into the water, I will change your little hut into a splendid castle." Then the fisherman answered, "Of what use is a castle to me if I have nothing to eat?" The goldfish continued, "That shall be taken care of. There will be a cupboard in the castle in which, when you open it, shall be dishes of the most delicate meats, and as many of them as you can desire." "If that be true," said the man, then I can do you a favor." "Yes," said the fish. "There is, however, the condition that you shall disclose to no one in the world, whosoever he may be, whence your good luck has come. If you speak but one single word, all will be over." Get some more of the music going. Then the man threw the wonderful fish back into the water and went home. But where his hovel had formerly stood, now stood a great castle. He opened wide his eyes, entered, and saw his wife dressed in beautiful clothes, sitting in a splendid room, and she was quite delighted, and said, "Husband, how has all this come to pass? It suits me very well." "Yes," said the man, "it suits me well too, but I am frightfully hungry. Just give me something to eat." Said the wife, "But I have got nothing, and I don't know where to find anything in this new house." "There is no need for your knowing," said the man, "for I see yonder a great cupboard. Just unlock it." When she opened it, there stood cakes, meat, fruit, wine, quite a bright prospect. Then the woman cried joyfully, "What more can you want, my dear?" And they sat down, and ate and drank together. When they had had enough, the woman said, "But husband, whence came all these riches?" "Alas," answered he, "do not question me about it, for I dare not tell you anything. If I disclose it to anyone, then all our good fortune will fly." "Very good," said she. "If I am not knowing anything, then I do not want to know anything." However, she was not in earnest. She never rested day or night, and she goaded her husband until, in his impatience, he revealed that all was owing to a wonderful golden fish which he had caught, and to which, in return, he had given its liberty. And as soon as the secret was out, the splendid castle with the cupboard immediately disappeared. They were once more in the old fisherman's hut, and the man was obliged to tell his former trade in fish. But fortune would so have it that he once more drew out the golden fish. "Listen," said the fish, "if you will throw me back into the water again, I will once more give you the castle with the cupboard full of roast and boiled meats. Only be firm. For your life's sake, don't reveal from whom you have it, or you will lose it all again." "I will take good care," answered the fisherman, and threw the fish back into the water. Now at home everything was once more in its former magnificence, and the wife was overjoyed at their good fortune. But curiosity left her no peace, so that after a couple days she began to ask again how it had come to pass, and how he had managed to secure it. The man kept silence for a short time, but at last she made him so angry that he broke out, and betrayed the secret. In an instant, the castle disappeared, and they were back again in their old hut. "Now you have got what you want," said he, "and we can gnaw at bare bone again." "Ah," said the woman, I had rather not have riches if I am not to know from whom they come, for then I have no peace." The man went back to fish, and after a while he chanced to draw out the gold fish for a third time. "Listen," said the fish, "I see very well that I am fated to fall into your hands. Take me home and cut me into 6 pieces. Give your wife 2 of them to eat, 2 to your horse, and bury 2 of them in the ground. Then they will bring you a blessing." The fisherman took the fish home with him, and did as it had bidden him. It came to pass, however, that from the 2 pieces that were buried in the ground 2 golden lilies sprang up, that the horse had 2 golden fowls, and the fisherman's wife bore 2 children who were made entirely of gold. The children grew up, became tall and handsome, and the lilies and horses grew likewise. Then they said, "Father, we want to mount our golden steeds and travel out in the world." But he answered sorrowfully, "How shall I bear it if you go away? and I know not of how it fares with you." Then they said, "The 2 golden lilies remained here. By them you can see how it is with us. If they are fresh, then we are in health. If they are withered, we are ill. If they perish, then we are dead." So they rode forth and came to an inn, in which there were many people. And when they perceived the golden children, they began to laugh and jeer. When one of them heard them mocking, he felt ashamed, and would not go out into the world, but turned back and went home again to his father. But the other rode forward and reached a great forest. As he was about to enter it, the people said, "It is not safe for you to ride through. The wood is full of robbers, who would treat you badly. You will fare ill. And when they see that you are all of gold, and your horses likewise, they will assuredly kill you." But he would not allow himself to be frightened, and said, "I must and will ride through it." Then he took bearskins and covered himself and his horses with them, so that the gold was no more to be seen, and rode fearlessly into the forest. When he had ridden onward, he heard a rustling in the bushes, and heard voices squeaking together. From one side came screams of, "There is one," but from the other, "Let him go, 'tis an idle fellow, as poor and bare as a church mouse. What should we gain from him?" So the gold child rode joyfully through the forest, and no evil befell him. One day he entered a village, wherein he saw a maiden, who was so beautiful that he did not believe that any more beautiful than she existed in the world. And as such a mighty love took possession of him, he went up to her and said, "I love thee with my whole heart. Wilt thou be my wife?" He, too, pleased the maiden so much that she agreed and said, "Yes, I will be thy wife, and be true to thee my whole life long." Then they were married, and just as they were in the greatest happiness, home came the father of the bride. And when he saw that his daughter's wedding was being celebrated, he was astonished, and said, "Where is the bridegroom?" They showed him the gold child, who, however, still wore his bare skins. Then the father said wrathfully, "A vagabond shall never have my daughter," and was about to kill him. Then the bride begged so hard as she could, and said, "He is my husband, and I love him with all of my heart," until at last he allowed himself to be appeased. Nevertheless, the idea never left his thoughts, so that the next morning he rose early, wishing to see whether his daughter's husband was a common ragged beggar. But when he peeped in, he saw a magnificent golden man in the bed, and the cast-off bearskins lying on the ground. Then he went back and thought, "What a good thing it was that I restrained my anger. I should have committed a great crime." But the gold child dreamed that he rode out to hunt a splendid stag, and when he awoke the next morning, he said to his wife, "I must go hunting." She was uneasy, and begged him to stay there, and said, "You might easily meet with a great misfortune." But he answered, "I must and will go." Thereupon he got up, and rode forth into the forest, and it was not long before a fine stag crossed his path exactly according to his dream. He aimed and was about to shoot it, when the stag ran away. He gave chase over hedges and ditches for the whole day without feeling tired, but in the evening the stag vanished from his sight, and when the gold child looked round him, he was standing before a little house, wherein was a witch. He knocked, and a little old woman came out and asked, "What are you doing so late in the midst of the great forest? Have you not seen a stag?" "Yes," answered she, "I know the stag well." And thereupon a little dog, which had come out of the house with her, barked at the man violently. "Wilt thou be silent, thou audacious toad?" said he, "or I will shoot thee dead." Then the witch cried out in a passion, "What? Will you slay my dog?" and immediately transformed him, so that he lay like a stone. What? That's crazy. And his bride awaited him in vain, and thought, "That which I so greatly dreaded, which lay so heavily on my heart, has come upon him. But at home the other brothers were standing by the golden lilies, when one of them suddenly dropped. "Good heavens," said he, "my brother has met with some great misfortune. I must away to see if I can possibly rescue him." Then the father said, "Stay here. If I lose you also, what shall I do?" But he answered, "I must and will go forth." Then he mounted his golden horse, and rode forth and entered the great forest, where his brother lay turned to stone. The old witch came out of her house and called him, wishing to entrap him also. But he did not go near her, and said, "I will shoot you, if you will not bring my brother to life again." She touched the stone, though very unwillingly, with her forefinger, and was immediately restored to his human shape. Let's get some more rain. But the two golden children rejoiced when they saw each other again, kissed and caressed each other, and rode away together out to the forest, the one home to his bride, and the other to his father. Then the father said, "I knew well that you had rescued your brother," for the golden lily suddenly rose up and blossomed out again. Then they lived happily, and all prospered with them until their death. That's a weird one. Maybe get something longer on. That first part kind of led us down a certain path, but it took a different turn to where it's all about the kids. That's how a lot of these are. They take a lot of weird turns. You never really know how they're gonna end. Alright, let me see. There we go. Thank you, chat. I appreciate the love. We appreciate it. Glad you guys are liking it. Any suggestions for the next one? Gossip Wolf. Gossip Wolf and the Fox. The Fox and his cousin. Okay. Gossip Wolf and the Fox, also known as the Fox and his cousin. What is this short one? The she-wolf brought forth a young one, and invited the fox to be godfather. "After all, he is a near relative of ours," said she. "He has a good understanding, and much talent. He can instruct my little son, and help him forward in the world." The fox, too, appeared quite honest, and said, "Worthy Mrs. Gossip," oh, so that's her name, "I thank you for the honor which you are doing me. I will, however, conduct myself in such a way that you shall be repaid for it." He enjoyed himself at the feast, and made merry. Afterwards he said, "Dear Miss Gossip, it is our duty to take care of the child. It must have good food that it may be strong. I know a sheepfold from which we might fetch a nice morsel." The wolf was pleased with the ditty, and she went out with the fox to the farmyard. He pointed out the fold from afar and said, "You will be able to creep in there without being seen, and in the meantime I will look about on the other side to see if I can pick up a chicken." He, however, did not go there, but sat down at the entrance of the forest, stretched his legs, and rested. The she-wolf crept into the stable. A dog was lying there, and it made such a noise that the peasants came running out, caught Gossip Wolf, and poured a strong burning mixture, which had been prepared for washing, over her skin. At last she escaped, and dragged herself outside. There lay the fox, who pretended to be full of complaints, and said, "Ah, dear Mistress Gossip, how ill I have fared. The peasants have fallen on me, and have broken every limb I have. If you do not want me to lie where I am and perish, you must carry me away." The she-wolf herself was not able to go away slowly, but she was in such concern about the fox that she took him on her back, and slowly carried him perfectly safe and sound to her house. Then the fox cried to her, "Farewell, dear Mistress Gossip. May the roasting you have had do you good," laughed merrily at her, and bounded off. Or the cunning little tailor. This one, this doesn't even make any sense. Trying to find somebody saying something about this, because that just doesn't make any sense. The reason that the fox calls the wolf Gossip Fox or Mrs. Gossip is not directly made clear in the narrative. Yeah. I have since learned that the use of gossip can be traced back before 12th century and is derived from the Old English word godsip. Godsip describes a person who is given a godparent role. Oh, so the use of gossip in this fairy tale is quite appropriate, sort of. Oh, so Gossip Wolf just means godfather, godparent wolf sort of deal. Oh, worthy Mrs. Gossip. Maybe they just happen to have that name for the sake of the story. The fox accepts the wolf's invitation to be the young one's godfather, although his brief speech is a little questionable. If the Grimm's purpose was to make their readers distrustful of foxes, mission accomplished, or it was not to let your own decisions about someone else's integrity prevent you from thinking. Okay. Maybe it was just a story about foxes. The cunning little tailor. There was once a time... Oh, let me get another track on. There was once on a time a princess who was extremely proud. If a wooer came, she gave him some riddle to guess, and if he could not find it out, he was sent contemptuously away. She let it be made known also that whoever so solved her riddle should marry her, and let him be who he might. At length, therefore, 3 tailors fell in with each other, the 2 eldest of whom thought they had done so many dexterous bits of work successfully that they could not fail to succeed in this also. The third was a little useless landlooper, who did not even know his trade, but thought he must have had some luck in this venture, for where else was it to come from? Then the two others said to him, "Just stay at home. Thou canst not do much with thy little bit of understanding." The little tailor, however, did not let himself be discouraged, and said he had set his head to work about this for once, and he would manage well enough. And he went forth as if the whole world were his. They all three announced themselves to the princess, and said she was to propound her riddle to them, and that the right persons were now come, who had understanding so fine that they could be threaded in a needle. Then said the princess, "I have two kinds of hair on my head. Of what color is it?" "If that be all," said the first, "it must be black and white, like the cloth which is called pepper and salt." The princess said, "Wrongly guessed. Let the second answer." Then said the second, "If it be not black and white, then it is brown and red, like my father's company coat." "Wrongly guessed," said the princess. "Let the third give the answer, for I see very well he knows it for certain." Then the little tailor stepped boldly forth and said, "The princess has a silver and a gold hair on her head, and those are the two different colors." When the princess heard that, she turned pale and nearly fell down from terror, for the little tailor had guessed her riddle, and she had firmly believed that no man on earth could discover it. When her courage returned, she said, "Thou hast not won me yet by that. There is still something else that thou must do. Below, in the stable, is a bear with which thou shalt pass the night. And when I get up in the morning, if thou art still alive, thou shalt marry me." She expected, however, she should thus get rid of the tailor, for the bear had never yet left anyone alive who had fallen into his clutches. The little tailor did not let himself be frightened away, but was quite delighted, and said, "Boldly ventured is half won." When therefore the evening came, our little tailor was taken down to the bear. The bear was about to set at the little fellow at once, and give him a hearty welcome with his paws. "Softly, softly," said the little tailor, "I will soon make thee quiet." Then, quite composedly, and as if he had not had an anxiety in the world, he took some nuts out of his pocket, cracked them, and ate the kernels. When the bear saw that, he was seized with a desire to have some nuts too. The tailor felt in his pockets, and reached him a handful. They were, however, not nuts, but pebbles. The bear put them in his mouth, but could get nothing out of them. Let him bite as he would. "Ah," thought he, "what a stupid blockhead I am. I cannot even crack a nut." And then he said to the tailor, "Here, crack me the nuts." "There, see what a stupid fellow thou art," said the little tailor, "to have such a great mouth, and not be able to crack a small nut." Then he took the pebble, and nimbly put a nut in his mouth in the place of it, and crack, it was in two. "I must try the thing again," said the bear. "When I watch you, I then think I ought to be able to do it too." So the tailor once more gave him a pebble, and the bear tried and tried to bite into it with all the strength of his body. But no one will imagine that he accomplished it. When that was over, the tailor took out a violin from beneath his coat, and played a piece of it to himself. When the bear heard the music, he could not help begin dancing, and when he had danced a while, the thing pleased him so well that he had said to the little tailor, "Hark you, is the fiddle heavy?" "Light enough for a child. Look, with the left hand I lay my fingers on it, with the right I stroke it with the bow, and then it goes merrily, hop, sa, sa, villere." "So," said the bear, "fiddling is a thing I should like to understand too, so that I might dance whenever I fancy. What's thou think of that? Wilt thou give me lessons?" "With all my heart," said the tailor, "if thou hadst talent for it. But just let me see thy claws. They are terribly long. I must cut thy nails a little." Then a vice was brought, and the bear put his claws in it, and the little tailor screwed it tight and said, "Now wait until I come with the scissors." And he let the bear growl as he liked, and lay down in the counter on a bundle of straw, and fell asleep. When the princess heard the bear growling so ferociously during the night, she believed nothing else but that he was growling for joy, and had made an end of the tailor. In the morning she arose carelessly and happily, and when she peeped into the stable, the tailor stood gaily before her, and was as healthy as a fish in the water. Now she could not say another word against the wedding because she had given a promise before everyone, and the king ordered a carriage to be brought in which she was to drive to church with the tailor, and there she was to be married. When they had got into the carriage, the two other tailors, who had false hearts and envied him his good fortune, went into the stable and unscrewed the bear again. The bear in a great fury ran after the carriage. The princess heard him snorting and growling. She was terrified, and she cried, "Ah! The bear is behind us, and wants to get thee." The tailor was quick and stood on his head, stuck his legs out of the window, and cried, "Dost thou see the vice? If thou dost not be off, thou shalt be put into it again." When the bear saw that, he turned round and ran away. The tailor drove quietly to church, and the princess was married to him at once, and he lived with her as happy as a woodlark. Whoever so does not believe this must pay a thaler. Must pay a thaler. What's a thaler? Oh, it's a silver coin. So if you don't believe it, you have to pay a thaler. That one made a lot more sense than the last one. I enjoyed that one more. Again, I'm not sure what the message exactly was. She didn't even really want to marry him. So I don't know how that's going to work out, I guess. Being clever. Something about being clever. A lot of these, the meanings are lost. Intelligence is the key to get rid of any problems, says these people. Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I took from it too. Just to be cunning, to get you out of things. Okay. Oh, good one. We like that one. It's about how to be a cunning little tailor. Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's what it's about. All right. Check out some Hans Andersen ones. These are all collections, okay. Saucy boy. The money pig. Little Mermaid, of course. I thought this one looked interesting. Oh, no one's written this in. Okay, this looks like a good one. The Hans Christian Andersen ones are definitely more narrative, have a little bit more structure to them most of the time than the Brother Grimm, just because they're a bit more modern than the Brother Grimms. Greth? Chicken Greth was the only human tenant of the fine new house that was built for the hens and ducks on the estate. It was built where the old baronial castle had stood with its tower, crow's perch, gable, moat, and drawbridge. Close by was a complete wilderness of trees and bushes. This had been the garden, running down to a big lake, which was now a marsh. Rooks, crows, and jackdaws, a whole horde of screeching, cawing birds, hovered over the trees. The flock did not seem to diminish, but rather to increase when one fired among them. They could be heard even inside the poultry house, where Chicken Greth sat, with the ducklings waddling about her wooden shoes. She knew each chicken and every duck from the moment it hatched. She took pride in her chickens and her ducks, and in the fine house that had been built for them. Her little room was clean and tidy. Her mistress, who owned the chicken house, insisted upon neatness, for she frequently brought... For she frequently brought distinguished visitors to see the barracks of her hens and ducks, as she had called the place. She had a rocking chair, and a wardrobe, and even a chest of drawers, on which stood a highly polished brass plate with the name Grubb engraved on it. It was the name of the old noble family that had lived there in the days when the castle was standing. The brass plate had been found while they were digging in the ground, and the parish clerk said that it had no value except as a relic. The clerk knew all about the place and the old days, for he was a scholar, and his table drawer was filled with manuscripts. He knew much about the old days, but perhaps the oldest crow knew more and jabbered about it in his own language. But that was all crow talk, which the clerk did not understand, learned though he was. Toward the end of hot summer day, the mist would rise over the marsh until it looked as if there were a lake beyond the old trees where the rooks, crows, and jackdaws lived. This was how it had looked when old Sir Grubb had lived there, and the castle with its massive red walls was still standing. In those days the dog's change used to reach clear across the gateway. By way of the tower one came to the stone flagged passage that led to the living quarters. The windows were narrow and the panes quite small, even in the great hall where they once used to dance. But, in the days of the last Grubbs, there had been no dancing for as far back as a man could remember, though an old kettle drum that had been used in the orchestra still remained in the hall. And there was also a curiously carved cupboard in which the rare flower bulbs were stored, for Lady Grubb took pleasure in planting and in cultivating flowers and bushes. Her husband preferred to hunt wild boars and wolves, and his little daughter, Marie, always rode with him. When she was no more than 5 years old, she sat proudly on horseback and gazed fearlessly about with her dark great eyes. She delighted in cracking her whip among the hounds, though her father would rather have seen her lash out among the peasant boys who came to stare at the gentry. The peasant who lived in a clay hut near the castle had a son named Sjoren? Sjoren? Sjoren. Sjoren. Who is the same age as the well-born little lady. He knew how to climb trees, and he had to bring birds' nests down to her. The birds screamed as loud as they could scream, and one of the largest of them struck him so hard right above his eye that blood ran down, and they thought at first that he had lost an eye, but it had not been injured. Marie Grubb called him her Sjören, a sign of high favor which once served to protect even his father, poor John. When he had done something wrong one day, John was condemned to ride the wooden horse. The contrivance stood in the yard, with 4 poles for legs, and for its back a single small rail which John had to straddle. Lest he ride it too comfortably, heavy bricks were tied to his feet. Damn. He made such agonized faces that little Sjören wept and went down to his knees to beg Marie to have his father released. I don't know if that sentence got carried over correctly. She instantly commanded that his father should be taken down. When she was not obeyed, Marie stamped her small feet on the flagstones and tugged at her father's coat sleeve until she tore it. She would have her way, and she got it. Sjören's father was released. Lady Grubb came to her, stroked her hair, and looked at her daughter with mild, approving eyes. But Marie did not understand why. She would go with the hounds, not with her mother, who went down through the garden to the lake, where the water lilies bloomed, and where the bulrushes swayed among the reeds. How charming, Lady Grubb would say, as she admired this fresh, abundant growth. A then very rare tree, which she herself had planted, grew in her garden. A blood beech it was called, a sort of dark moor among the other trees. So brown were its leaves. It needed plenty of sunlight. For the constant shade, its leaves would turn green like those of other trees, and thus lose their distinction. In her tall chestnut trees, in the shrubbery, and even the grass were many bird nests. The birds seemed to understand that they were safe here, where no one dared fire a gun. But little Marie came here with Sjören, who, as we know, could climb, and she sent him to bring her down both the eggs and the little downy birds. The parent birds fluttered about in terror and anguish, large and small, lapwings from the lawns, rooks, crows, and jackdaws from the tall trees. They screamed and shrieked, just as their progeny shriek today. "Children, what are you doing?" the gentlewoman cried. "What a wicked thing to do." Sjören looked ashamed, and even the high-born young girl looked a little embarrassed. But then she said in an abrupt and sulky way, "My father lets me do this." "Away, away!" the blackbirds screeched, and away they flew. But they came back the next day because they lived there. I guess that makes sense. They do live there. But the quiet gentlewoman did not live there much longer. The Lord called her away, and with him she was more at home than ever she was in this house. The church bell solemnly tolled as her body was carried to the church, and poor men's eyes grew dim, for she had shown them kindness. And now that she was gone, no one looked after her plants, so the garden went back to ruin. Damn. Sir Grubb is a hard man, people would say, but young as she is, his daughter can handle him. He would laugh and let her have her will. She was 12 years old now, tall and well-built. She looked right through people with her great dark eyes, rode her horse like a man, and shot her gun like an experienced hunter. It came to pass that great men visited that district. They were as great can be. The young king with his half-brother and crony, Lord Ulrich Frederick Gleidenloven. They came to hunt wild boar, and they planned to stay overnight at Sir Grubb's castle. At the table, when Gleidenlove sat beside Marie, he took her about the neck and gave her a kiss, just as if they had been related. But she gave him a slap in the face, and told him she could not stand him. This caused great laughter, as if it were a most pleasing sight. And maybe it was, because 5 years later, when Marie was 17, Gleidenlove sent a messenger with a letter asking for her hand in marriage. That was something. "He is the highest and most gallant lord in the land," said Sir Grubb. You cannot refuse him." "I don't like him much," Marie Grubb said. But she did not turn down the highest lord in the land, who sat next to the king. Her silver, woolens, and linens were sent by ship to Copenhagen. Marie made the trip overland in 10 days. But the ship with the dowry met with contrary winds, or no wind at all. It took 4 months to reach Copenhagen, and when it did get there, Lady Glydenlove had gone. "I'd sooner lie on sacks than in this silken bed," she said. "I'd sooner walk barefoot than ride in a carriage with him." Late on an evening in November, 2 women came riding into the town of Aarhus. They were Lady Glydenlove and her maid. They came from Vale, where they had arrived by ship from Copenhagen. They rode up to Sir Grubb's townhouse. He was not at all pleased to see Marie. He gave her harsh words, but he did give her a bedroom. He got her beer broth for breakfast, but no good words to go with it. Her father's bad temper had turned against her, and she was not used to it. Her own temper was by no means mild. As one is spoken to, so one answers, and answer she did. Of her husband she spoke with bitterness and hatred. She declared that she could not live with him. She was too honorable and virtuous for that. In this fashion a year went by, most unpleasantly. Bitter words passed between father and daughter. That should not be. Bitter words bear bitter fruit. What would be the outcome? One day her father said, "We cannot live under the same roof. You must move to our old castle. I would rather you bit off your tongue than spoke lies." I don't know what beer broth is. I was assuming it's just like the beer foam. Beer. Oh, maybe it's like a bone broth. Looks to still be meat-based. I guess they just use beer instead of 2.5 pounds of butcher bones or soup bones. 6 beers. Okay, yeah. So it's pretty much just like normal stock, but with beer. Oh. So they parted. With her maid, she went to the old estate where she was born and bred, and where her mother, that pious gentlewoman, lay in the churchyard vault. An old cowherd lived in the castle, and that was all. Cobwebs, heavy and black with dirt, draped every room. The garden was not taken care of. Wild hops and other climbing vines wove a tangled web between trees and shrubbery. Hemlock and nettles grew tall and rank. The blood beech had been outgrown, and in the deep shade its leaves had turned as green as those of ordinary trees. Its glory was gone. Rooks, crows, and jackdaws flew in enormous flocks above the tall chestnuts. They shrieked and cawed as if they had great news to tell each other. Here she was again, the girl who ordered their eggs and babies to be stolen from the nests. The real thief, the one who had actually stolen them, was now climbing a leafless tree. He clung to the tall ship's mast, and got his share of lashes with the rope's end if he didn't behave himself. All this was told in our own time by the parish clerk. He had pieced it together from books and letters, and lay it with many another manuscript hidden away in his table drawer. "Up and down is the way the world goes," he said. "It's a curious story to hear. We want to hear how it went with Marie Grubb, but we shall not lose track of Chicken Greth, who sat there in her fine hen house in her own day. Marie Grubb sat in this place in her day, but not so contentedly as old Chicken Greth." Winter went by. Spring and summer passed, and again came the stormy autumn with its cold and wet fog. It was a dull and dreary life there on the old estate. Marie Grubb could snatch up her gun and go out on the hearth to shoot hares or foxes, and whatever bird she could find. More than once on those excursions she encountered a nobleman, Sir Polly Dryer from Norrin? I have no idea. With his gun and his dogs. He was a big man who enjoyed boasting of his strength when he talked to her. He might have been a match for the departed Mr. Brockenhus of Egesskov at Fryen, whom people still remember as a man of might. Like him, Paul Dryer had fastened a hunting horn to an iron chain over his gateway. When he came home, he would catch hold of the chain, lift himself and his horse clear off the ground, and sound his horn. I want to see what that looks like. That sounds like a crazy contraption. He fastened a hunting horn to an iron chain over his gateway. When he came home, he would catch hold of the chain, lift himself and his horse clear off the ground, and sound the horn. That's great. You must come to my castle and see that. Yeah, I'd say yes to that. I would come to his castle and see that. For we have fine fresh air out in Nuremberg. We have no record of when she went to Nuremberg, but on the candlesticks of Nuremberg, I'm not saying it right, but the church, it is inscribed that they were given by Paul Dryer and Marie Grubb of Nuremberg Castle. Body and strength had Paul Dryer. He could drink like a sponge. He was like a cask that can never be filled. He snored enough for a whole pig pen, and he looked red and bloated. Damn. Is any of this real? Seemingly not. A cunning swine and a nagging fool he is, said Lady Paul Dryer, the daughter of Grubb. She soon grew weary of the life there, which did not improve matters. At dinner time one day, the food got cold on the table. Polly Dryer was off fox hunting, and Lady Dryer could not be found. Polly Dryer came home at midnight. Lady Dryer came home neither by midnight nor by morning. She turned her back upon Nuremberg, and rode away without a word of farewell. The weather was cloudy and wet. The wind was sharp, and the flock of black birds that croaked over her head were not as homeless as she. First she rode south, almost to Germany. Well, from Copenhagen, I don't think that'd even be that far. It's like a day's trip. She turned a couple of gold rings with precious stones into ready money. She went east and she went west, with no fixed goal. She was angry with everybody, and even with the good Lord himself, so sick was her mind. And soon her body was sick too. She could scarcely drag her feet along. The lapwing flung up from its tuft of grass when she stumbled upon it and fell. The bird screamed, as it always does, "You thief! You thief!" Yet she had never stolen her neighbor's goods, except for the bird's eggs and nestlings taken from the clumps of grass and the tall trees when she was a little girl. She thought of that now. From where she lay, she could see the sand dunes along the beach. Fishermen lived there, but she was too ill to crawl forward. The great white seagulls came screeching over her as the rocks, crows, and jackdaws screamed above the trees at home. The birds flew nearer and nearer, until at last she thought they were blackbirds. But then everything went black before her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, she was being carried in the arms of a tall, strapping fellow. She looked straight into his bearded face, and saw that he had a scar over one eye that appeared to divide the eyebrow in two. Sick as she was, he carried her to a ship, where he was abused by the shipmaster for bringing such a burden. The ship set sail next day. Marie Grubb sailed with it. She was not put ashore. Didn't she ever come back? Yes, but when and how? The parish clerk could tell us about this too. It was not a tale which he had pieced together. He had the whole strange story from a reliable book, which we could get and read for ourselves. The Danish author, Ludwig Haldberg, who has written so many books worth reading and so many gay comedies by which we get to know his time and its people, mentions Marie Grubb in his letters, which tell how and in what part of the world he found her. This is well worth hearing, but we shall not lose track of Chicken Greeth, who sits so happily and comfortable in her imposing chicken house. Yeah, don't forget about it. The ship sailed off with Marie Grubb. That was where we left off. Year upon year went by. The plague was raging in Copenhagen. That was in the year of 1711. Is that? I thought it was. Maybe it was a more recent one. 1711. The Queen of Denmark went to her German home. The king left his capital, and everyone who could have made haste to leave. The students, even those who had free board and lodging, scurried out of the city. One of them, the last student left at what they called Borch's College, near the students' headquarters, made ready to go. At 2 o'clock in the morning he started out, with his knapsack stuffed with more books and manuscripts than clothes. A raw, dank mist hung over the city. Not a soul was to be seen in the street through which he passed. All around him the gates and doors were marked with the crosses which showed that there people lay ill or had died of the plague. Even in broad and winding Meatmonger Street, as the street leading from the Round Tower to the King's Palace was called then, there was not a man to be seen. Suddenly a large hearse came rumbling by. The driver cracked his whip to urge his horses into a gallop. Hold on, let me fix the mic. There. For the wagon was crammed with to urge his horses into gallop. For the wagon was crammed with corpses. The young student covered his face with his hands, and breathed the fumes of strong spirits, which he carried in a brass box sponge. From a grog shop in one of the streets came the sound of songs and forced laughter. Men were drinking the night away in an effort to forget that death stood at their door, beckoning to them to come with him and join the other dead men in the hearse. The student hurried on to Castle Bridge, where 2 small boats were moored. One of them was just about to cast off and quit the plague-ridden city. If the Lord spares out lives and the wind serves us, we shall sail to Grunsund on Falster, the captain said, and he asked the name of the student who wanted to go with them. Ludwig Holdberg, the student said, and at that time it sounded like any other name. Now it resounds as one of Denmark's proudest names, but he was then only a young student and unknown. Who is this guy? Ludwig. It is a real guy. I think this is sounding like a real story so far. Let me turn down the mic. There we go. This is sounding like a real story so far. I think all of this might have happened, and like Hans Andersen did go to these places and like collect all this stuff. Let's read it. Let's see who this is. Was a writer, essayist, philosopher, historian, playwright. Okay, that's a bit much. And this is like right in the Renaissance Enlightenment period, so that makes sense. Yeah. He must have just been a good playwright. Written works. Okay, yeah, a lot of comedies, poems, essays. It's a bit of a historian. The boat slipped past the castle, and before daybreak they came to the open sea. A light breeze sprang up and the sails filled. The student sat down with the wind in his face and fell asleep. That wasn't exactly an advisable thing to do. On the 3rd morning the boat was already at Falster. "Do you know of anyone in this place with whom I can live cheaply?" Haldberg asked the captain. "I believe you had best go to the ferryman's wife at Boren House," he said. "If you want to be polite, call her mother Soren Sorensen Moller. but she may turn angry if you show her too much politeness. Her husband is under arrest for some crimes or other, and she runs the ferry herself. What fish she has." The student shouldered his knapsack and went to the ferry house. The door was not locked, so he lifted the latch and entered a brick-floored room in which a large folding bed with a big furred cover was the most noticeable piece of furniture. A white hen, with her chickens around her, was tied to the bedstand. She had upset her drinking dish, and water ran across the floor. No one was there or in the next room, except a little child who lay in a cradle. The ferry boat came back with only one person on board. Whether man or woman was hard to say. This person was wrapped in a great cloak, with a hood that covered the head. When the boat was docked, it was a woman who entered the room. She had an impressive air as she straightened up and looked at him. Two proud eyes were set under her dark brows. It was Mother Shorin, the ferryman's wife. Through rooks, crows, and jackdaws could scream out another name by which he would have known her better. Glum she looked, and little enough she cared for talk, but it was settled that the student would stay and board with her for an undetermined time, until things went well again in Copenhagen. Now and then some honest fellows from the neighboring town dropped in at the ferry house. Among them were Frank, the cutler, and Sievert, the customs collector, who came to drink a mug of ale and to chat with the student. He was a thoughtful young man who knew what's what, as they said. He read Latin and Greek, and was well posted in many fields of knowledge. Well, that makes sense based off his Wikipedia. "The less one knows, the lighter the burden," said Mother Soren. One day when Hallberg watched her wash clothes in strong lye and chop up knotty stumps for firewood, he told her, "You work too hard." "That's my business," she said. "What you had to toil and slave this way ever since you were a child?" "Read the answer in my hands," she said, and showed him her two hands, small but strong and hard, with broken nails. "You know how to read. Read them." At Christmas time there was a heavy snowfall. The cold made itself at home, and the winds blew as bitterly as if they were dashing acid in people's face. But the Shorin didn't care. She flung on her cloak, drew up the hood, and went about her business. When the house grew dark early in the afternoon, she would throw pine knots in the fire and sit by it to darn her stockings, for she had no one to do it for her. As the evening came on, she talked with the student more than she usually did. She spoke of her husband. By accident, he killed a captain from Draugr, and for this they put him in chains and sentenced him to 3 years of hard labor on the King's Island. He is only an ordinary soldier, so the law must take its course, you know. "The law applies to the upper class too," Hallberg said. "Do you believe that?" Mother Soren stared into the fire, and then went on. "Do you know the story of K-like, who ordered one of his churches torn down? When Mads, the pastor, thundered from the pulpit against this, he had Mads clapped in iron and thrown in prison. Then he appointed himself judge, found Mads guilty, condemned him, and had his head struck off. That was no accident, yet K-like was never punished." "He was within his right, according to the custom of his time," Hallberg said. "We have come a long way since then." "Try to make fools believe you." Mother Soren got up and went into the next room, where Tosin, her little child, lay in the cradle. When she had tidied and aired the cradle, she made the student's bed. He had the big furred cover, for though he was born in Norway, he felt the cold more than she did. New Year's Day dawned clear and sunny. It was so cold that the snowdrifts were hard enough for one to walk across them. The bells in the village were ringing for church, as student Hallberg wrapped himself in his heavy cloak to set off for town. Rooks flew screeching over Bora House, and so did the crows and jackdaws. They made such a racket that you could scarcely hear the bells. Mother Soren stood outside. filling a brass kettle with snow to melt over the fire for drinking water. She gazed up at the dark swarm of birds and thought her own thoughts. Student Holdberg went to church, and on his way back, he passed the house of Sievert, the customs collector. Sievert invited him to warm himself for a bowl of mulled ale, sweetened with syrup and ginger. They started to talk about Mother Soren, but the customs collector knew little about her. Indeed, there were few who did. "She is not a native Falster," he said, "and she has probably seen better days. Her husband is a common sailor, with a violent temper. He killed the captain of Dragar, and, though he used to beat his wife, she always sticks up for him." "I would never stand for that," said the customs collector's wife. "I come from better stock. My father wove stockings for the king." "So naturally you married one of the king's officers," Holdberg said, with a bow to her husband. 12th night came, and Mother Soren lighted for Holdberg a candle of the 3 kings, that is, 3 small tallow candles, which she herself had prepared. "A candle for each man," said Holdberg. "Each man," she exclaimed, and looked at him hard. "Each of the wise men from the east," Holdberg said. "Oh, that's how you meant it," she said, and sat in silence for a while. But on that evening of the 3 kings, he learned a great deal about her that he had not known. "You are fond of the man you are wedded to," Holdberg said, "yet people tell me he daily mistreats you." "That concerns no one but me," Mother Soren declared. "The blows would have done me good had they fallen when I was a child. Now they probably fall for my sins. I only know the good he has done me." Damn, she should probably rethink that. She stood up straight. "When I lay ill and weak among the sand dunes, and no one would come near me except perhaps the rooks, the crows, and the jackdaws, who came to pick at me, he carried me in his arms, and got hard words for bringing such a find on board his ship. I do not come of sickly stock, so I recovered. All of us have our faults, and Soren has his. One must not judge the horse by his halter. With him I have led a more pleasant life than I did with him whom they called the highest and most gallant one of all the king's men. I have been married to Governor Gleidenlove, half-brother to the king. Afterward I took Paul Dreyer. Good or bad, each has his own way, and I have mine. That was a long story, and now you know it." Mother Soren went out of the room. So this was Marie Grubb. So strangely does the ball of fortune turn. She did not live to see many more feasts of the 3 kings. Holdberg wrote that she died in June 1716, but he did not write, for he did not know, that when Mother Soren, as they called her, lay dead in Bortenhouse, that a flock of large birds flew over the roof in silence. They did not scream, and it was as if they knew that at funerals one must be quiet. As soon as she was in the grave, the birds departed. But on that same evening the birds were seen in numerous numbers over her old estate in Jutland. Rooks, crows, and jackdaws screamed to each other as if they had much to tell. Perhaps they croaked of him who robbed them of their eggs and young ones when she was a boy, the peasant boy who received an iron garter on the king's island, and also of the high-born young lady who died a fairy woman at Gronson. "Brah, brah," they croaked, and brah, brah, the whole tribe croaked when the old castle was torn down. And this they cry still, though there is nothing left to croak about, said the parish clerk when he told the story. The family died out, the castle was torn down, and where it stood the new hen house now stands, with its gilded weather rock on the roof, and chicken greth inside. There she sits, well satisfied with her cozy residence, for if she had not come here she would have gone to the workhouse. The pigeons cooed above her, the turkeys clucked, and the ducks quacked around her. No one knew her, they said. She had no relatives. By an act of charity she came here. and children she had none. Nevertheless, she had ancestors, though she did not know of them, nor did the parish clerk, for all the manuscripts he had in his drawer. But one of the old crows knew, and he told about it. For its mother and its grandmother, it had heard tell of Chicken Greth's mother and Sorry about that. We know how, as a child, she rode over the drawbridge and looked about proudly, as if the whole world and all the birds' nests in it belonged to her. He also saw her on the sand dunes, and at last at the ferry house. Her granddaughter, last of her line, had come home again where the old castle had stood, and where the wild birds croaked. But she sat among her tame fowls, known by them and on friendly terms with them. Chicken Greth had nothing more to wish for. She was happy to die and old enough to die. Grave, grave, the crows croaked. And Chicken Greth was buried in a good grave. No one knows where it lies except the old crow, if he isn't dead too. Now we know the story of the old castle and all of Chicken Greth's family. Okay, this was translated from, this used to be in Danish. I was going to say, a few of those sentences here and there seemed like they were incorrectly translated or didn't have grammar or punctuation that made any sense. But yeah, it's a translation, so that makes sense. A lot of these old stories are hard to read. They got some weird pacing in their sentences. But that's the Chicken Greth's family. I thought it'd be about a chicken, but it really wasn't. Yeah, toxic medieval relationship kind of drama. Crazy. It is a little bit of a sad one, yeah. But I think some of it's real. It seemed real. I mean, that's a real person, this guy. Okay. We're gonna have a small intermission here. We're gonna go ahead. Yeah, Windows sucks. You can't just show it. Can we get this full screen? I think it is maybe is a telling of some locals. Yeah, it's like pieced together. Like he pieced all that together. No, still the same thing. Yeah, I wish I could just... You know what? I think I can do something in OBS if I do this. And then if I do this. Oh. Okay, that did something. Wait, here we go. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Now we got the whole picture up on there. All right. Intermission. Intermission. Okay, we're back. We are back. Go ahead and... take that out. There we go. We're back. We are back. Okay, any suggestions for the next one? We just read Chicken Breast's Family. This one was a long one. I really like the Chris Andersen, though. That was definitely an interesting one. I can go through this list here. If we see any here that we might like. Let's do the metal pig. The bottleneck, okay. Let's see. Bottleneck. We get a little illustration. Fir tree. Oh, give me one more second before we start this one. For the dog. Okay, we wanted metal pig. Okay, this is the metal pig. Oh no, we wanted the bottleneck, sorry. The bottleneck. Close to the corner of a street, among other abodes of poverty, stood an exceedingly tall, narrow house, which had been so knocked about by the time that it seemed out of joint in every direction. This house was inhabited by poor people, but the deepest poverty was apparent in the garret lodging in the gable. In front of the little window, an old bent bird cage hung in the sunshine, which had not even a proper water glass, but instead of it the broken neck of a bottle, turned upside down, and a cork stuck in it to make it hold the water with which it was filled. An old maid stood at the window. She had hung chicken weed over the cage, and the little inlet which it contained hopped from perch to perch, and sang and twittered merrily. "Yes, it is all very well for you to sing," said the bottleneck. That is, he did not really speak the words as we do, for the neck of a bottle cannot speak, but he thought them to himself in his own mind, just as people sometimes talk quietly to themselves. "Yes, you may sing very well. You have all your limbs uninjured. You should feel what it is like to lose your body, and only have a neck and a mouth left, with a cork stuck in it, as I have. You wouldn't sing then, I know. After all, it is just as that there are some who can be happy. I have no reason to sing, nor could I sing now if I were ever so happy. But when I was a whole bottle, and they rubbed me with a cork, didn't I sing? It used to be called a complete lark. I remember when I went out to a picnic with the furrier's family, on the day his daughter was betrothed. It seemed as if it only happened yesterday. I had gone through a great deal in my time. When I come to recollect, I have been in the fire and in the water. I have been deep in the earth, and have mounted higher in the air than most other people. And now I am swinging here, outside a bird cage, in the air and the sunshine. Oh, indeed, it would be worthwhile to hear my story. I do not speak it aloud, for a good reason, because I cannot. That's a crazy, it's a crazy backstory for a bottle. This really is about a bottleneck. These old stories seem to love personifying inanimate objects, like bottlenecks. It's still a thing today, of course, but it's huge. The bottleneck related his history, which was really rather remarkable. He, in fact, related it to himself, or at least thought it in his own mind. Okay? The little bird sang his own song merrily. In the street below, there was driving and running to and fro. Everyone thought of his own affairs, or perhaps of nothing at all. But the bottleneck thought deeply. He thought of the blazing furnace in the factory, where he had been blown into life. Wow, this really is about a bottleneck. He remembered how hot it felt when he was placed in the heated oven, the home from which he sprang, and that he had a strong inclination to leap out again directly. But after a while it became cooler, and he found himself very comfortable. He had been placed in a row, with a whole regiment of his brothers and sisters all brought out of the same furnace. Some of them had certainly been blown into champagne bottles, and others into beer bottles, which made little difference between them. In the world it often happens that a beer bottle may contain the most precious wine, and a champagne bottle be filled with blacking, and even in decay it may always be seen whether a man has been well born. Nobility remains noble, as a champagne bottle remains the same, even with blacking in its interior. When the bottles were packed, our bottle was packed amongst them. It little expected then to finish its career as a bottle neck, or to be used as a water glass to a bird's cage, which is, after all, a place of honor, for it is to be of some use in the world. The bottle did not behold the light of day again, until it was unpacked with the rest of the wine in the merchant's cellar, and, for the first time, rinsed with water, which caused some very curious sensations. What, really? He felt it. There it lay empty, and without a cork, and it had a peculiar feeling, as if it wanted something it knew not what. At last it was filled with rich and costly wine. A cork was placed on it and sealed down. Yeah, see, Jason probably loves this story, because this is like the origin story of his best friend here. Then it was labeled first quality, as if it had carried off the first prize at an examination. Besides, the wine and the bottle were both good, and while we are young is a time for poetry. There were sounds of song within the bottle, of things it could not understand, of green sunny mountains, where the vines grow, and where the merry vine dressers laugh, sing, and are merry. Ah, how beautiful is life! All these tones of joy and song in the bottle were like the working of a young poet's brain, who often knows not the meaning of the tones which are sounding within him. One morning the bottle found a purchaser in the furrier's apprentice, who was told to bring one of the best bottles of wine. It was placed in the provision basket with ham and cheese and sausages. The sweetest fresh butter and the finest bread were put into the basket by the furrier's daughter herself, for she packed it. She was young and pretty. Her brown eyes laughed, and a smile lingered round her mouth as sweet as that in her eyes. Get some, I gotta get an auto playlist for this music. She had delicate hands, beautifully white, and her neck was with her still. It could easily be seen that she was a very lovely girl, and as yet she was not engaged. picks up. The provision basket lay in the lap of the young girl as the family drove out to the forest, and the neck of the bottle peeped out from between the folds of the white napkin. There was the red wax on the cork, and the bottle looked straight at the young girl's face, and also at the face of the young sailor who sat near her. It was a young friend, the son of a portrait painter. He had lately passed his examination with honor as mate, and the next morning he was to sail in his ship to a distant coast. Oh, they're old friends. Interesting. There had been a great deal of talk on this subject while the basket was being packed, and during this conversation the eyes and the mouth of the furrier's daughter did not wear a very joyful expression. The young people wandered away into the green wood and talked together. What did they talk about? The bottle could not say, for he was in the provision basket. It remained there for some time, but when at last it was brought forth, it appeared as if something pleasant had happened, for everyone was laughing. The furrier's daughter laughed too, but she said very little, and her cheeks were like two roses. Then her father took the bottle and the corkscrew into his hands. What a strange sensation it was to have the cork drawn for the first time. The bottle could never again after forget the performance of that moment. Indeed, there is quite a convolution within him as the cork flew out, and a gurgling sound as the wine was poured forth into the glasses. "Long life to the betrothed," cried the papa, and every glass was emptied to the dregs, while the young sailor kissed his beautiful bride. "Happiness and blessings to you both," said the old people, father and mother, and the young man filled the glasses again. "Safe return, and a wedding this day next year," he cried, and when the glasses were empty and he took the bottle, he raised it on high and said, "Thou hast been present here on the happiest day of my life. Thou shalt never be used by others." And so he hurled it high into the air. The furrier's daughter thought she should never see it again, but she was mistaken. It fell among the rushes on the border of the little woodland lake. The bottleneck remembered well how long it lay there unseen. "I gave them wine, and they gave me muddy water," he said to himself, but I suppose it was all well meant. He could no longer see the betrothed couple, nor the cheerful old people, but for a long time he could hear them rejoicing and singing. At length there came by two peasant boys, who peeped in among the reeds and spied out the bottle. Then they took it up and carried it home with them, so that once more it was provided for. At home in their wooden cottage, these boys had an elder brother, a sailor, who was about to start on a long voyage. He had been there the day before to say farewell, and his mother was now very busy packing up various things for him to take with him on his voyage. In the evening his father was going to carry the parcel to the town to see his son once more, and take him a farewell greeting from his mother. A small bottle had already been filled with herb tea, mixed with brandy, and wrapped in a parcel. When the boy came in, they brought with them a larger and stronger bottle, which they had found. This bottle would hold so much more than the little one, and they all said the brandy would be so good for complaints of the stomach, especially as it was mixed with medical herbs. The liquid which they poured into the bottles was not like the red wine with which it had once been filled. These were bitter drops, but they are of great use sometimes for the stomach. The new large bottle was to go, not the little one. So the bottle once more started on its travels. It was taken on board, for Peter Jensen was one of the crew, the very same ship in which the young mate was to sail. But the mate did not see the bottle. Indeed, if he had, he would have not known it, or supposed it was the one out of which they had drunk to the felicity of the betrothed and to the prospect of a marriage on his own happy return. Certainly the bottle no longer poured forth wine, but it contained something quite as good, and so it happened that whenever Peter Jensen brought it out, his messmates gave it the name of the apothecary, for it contained the best medicine to cure the stomach, and he gave it out quite willingly as long as a drop remained. Those were the happy days, and the bottle would sing when rubbed with the cork, and it was called a great lark. Peter Jensen's great lark. Oh, so it had like a renewed life on a boat being passed around with sailors. That's nice. What a wonderful story about a bottle so far. Long days and months rolled by, during which the bottle stood empty in a corner. When a storm arose, whether on the passage out or home it could not tell, for it had never been ashore. It was a tailboard storm. Great waves arose, darkly heaving and tossing the vessel to and fro. The main mast was split asunder, the ship sprang a leak, and the pumps became useless, while all around was black at night. At the last moment, when the ship was sinking, the young mate wrote on a piece of paper, "We are going down. God's will be done." Then he wrote the name of his betrothed, his own name, and that of the ship. Then he put the leaf in an empty bottle that happened to be on hand, corked it down tightly, and threw it into the foaming sea. He knew not that it was the very same bottle from which the goblet of joy and hope had once been filled for him, and now it was tossing on the waves with his last greeting and a message from the dead. The ship sank, and the crew sank with her. But the bottle flew on like a bird, for it bore within it a loving letter from a loving heart. And as the sun rose and set, the bottle felt, as at the first time of its first existence, when it, in the heated glowing stove it had a longing to fly. And as the sun rose and set, the bottle felt, as at the time of its first existence, when in the heated glowing stove it had a longing to fly away. It outlived the storms and the calm. It struck against no rocks and was not devoured by sharks, but drifted on for more than a year, and sometimes toward the north, sometimes toward the south, just as the current carried it. It was in all other ways its own master, but even of that one may get tired. The written leaf, the last farewell of the bridegroom to his bride, would only bring sorrow when it reached her hands. Where were those hands, so soft and delicate, which had once spread the tablecloth on the fresh grass and the green wood, on the day of her betrothal? Ah, yes, where was the furrier's daughter? And where was the land which might lie nearest to her home? The bottle knew not. It traveled onward, and at last all this wandering about became wearisome. At all events, it was not its usual occupation, but it had to travel, till at length it reached land, a foreign country. Not a word spoken in this country could the bottle understand. It was a language it had never heard before, and it is a great loss not to be able to understand a language. The bottle was fished out of the water and examined on all sides. The little letter contained within it was discovered, taken out, and turned and twisted in every direction, but the people could not understand what was written upon it. They could be quite sure that the bottle had been thrown overboard from a vessel, and that something about it was written on this paper. But what was written? That was the question. So the paper was put back into the bottle, and then both were put away in a large cupboard of one of the great houses of the town. Whenever any strangers arrived, the paper was taken out and turned over and over, so that the address, which was only written in pencil, became almost illegible, and at last no one could distinguish any letters on it at all. For a whole year the bottle remained standing in the cupboard, and then it was taken up to the loft, where it soon became covered with dust and cobwebs. Ah, how often then it thought of those better days, of the times when in the fresh green wood it had poured forth rich wine, or while rocked by the swelling waves, it had carried on its bosom a secret, a letter, a last parting sigh. For full 20 years it stood in the loft, and it might have stayed there much longer, but that the house was going to be rebuilt. The bottle was discovered when the roof was taken off. They talked about it, but the bottle did not understand what they said. A language is not to be learnt by living in a loft, even for 20 years. If I had been downstairs in the room, thought the bottle, I might have learned it. It was now washed and rinsed, which process was quite necessary, and afterwards it looked clean and transparent, and felt young again in its old age. But the paper which it had carried so faithfully was destroyed in the washing. They filled the bottle with seeds, though it scarcely knew what had been placed in it. Then they corked it down tightly and carefully wrapped it up. There, not even the light of a torch or lantern could reach it, much less the brightness of the sun or moon. And yet, thought the bottle, men go on a journey that they may see as much as possible, and I can see nothing. However, it did something quite as important. It traveled to the place of its destination, and was unpacked. "What trouble they have taken with that bottle over yonder," said one, "and very likely it is broken after all." But the bottle was not broken, and, better still, it understood every word that was said. This language it had heard at the furnaces, and at the wine merchants, in the forest, and on the ship. It was the only good old language it could understand. It had returned home, and the language was as a welcome greeting. For every joy, it felt ready to jump out of people's hands, and scarcely noticed that its cork had been drawn, and its contents emptied out, till it found itself carried to a cellar, to be left there and forgotten. There's no place like home, even if it's a cellar. It never occurred to him to think that he might lie there for years. He felt so comfortable. For many years he remained in the cellar, till at last some people came to carry away the bottles, and ours amongst the number. Out in the garden there was a great festival. Brilliant lamps hung in festoons from the tree to tree, and paper lanterns, through which the light shone till they looked like transparent tulips. It was a beautiful evening, and the weather mild and clear. The stars twinkled, and the new moon, in the form of a crescent, was surrounded by the shadowy disk of the whole moon, and looked like a gray globe with a golden rim. It was a beautiful sight for those who had good eyes. The illumination extended even to the most retired of the garden walks, at least not so retired that anyone need lose himself there. In the borders were placed bottles, each containing a light, and among them the bottle with which we are acquainted, and whose fate it was, one day, to only be a bottleneck, and to serve as a water glass to a bird's cage. Everything here appeared lovely to our bottle, for it was again in the green wood, amid joy and feasting. Again it heard music and song, and the noise and murmur of a crowd, especially in that part of the garden where the lamps blazed, and the paper lanterns displayed their brilliant colors. It stood in a distant walk certainly, but at a place pleasant for contemplation, and it carried a light, and was at once useful and ornamental. In such an hour, it is easy to forget that one has spent 20 years in a loft, and a good thing it is to be able to do so. Close before the bottle passed a single pair, like the bridal pair, the mate and the furrier's daughter, who had so long ago wandered in the wood. It seemed to the bottle as if he were living that time over again. Not only the guests, but other people were walking in the garden, who were allowed to witness the splendor and festivities. Among the latter came an old maid, who seemed to be quiet and alone in the world. She was thinking, like the bottle, of the green wood, and of a young betrothed pair, who were closely connected with herself. She was thinking of that hour, the happiest of her life, in which she had taken part, when she had herself been one of that betrothed pair. Such hours are never to be forgotten. Let a maiden be as old as she may. But she did not recognize the bottle. Neither did the bottle notice the old maid. And so we often pass each other in the world when we meet, as those two did, even while together in the same town. The bottle was taken from the garden, and again sent to a wine merchant, where it was once more filled with wine, and sold to an aeronaut, who was to make an ascent in his balloon on the following Sunday. A great crowd assembled to witness the sight. Military music had been engaged, and many other preparations made. The bottle saw it all from the basket in which he lay close to live a rabbit. What? The bottle saw it all from the basket, in which he lay close to a live rabbit. The rabbit was quite excited because he knew that he was to be taken up and let down again in a parachute. The bottle, however, knew nothing of the up or the down. He saw only that the balloon was swelling larger and larger till it could swell no more, and began to rise and be restless. Then the ropes which held it were cut through, and the aerial ship rose in the air with the aeronaut and the basket containing the bottle and the rabbit, while the music sounded and all the people shouted, "Hurrah!" "This is a wonderful journey up into the air," thought the bottle. "It is a new way of sailing, and here, at least, there is no fear of striking against anything." Thousands of people gazed at the balloon, and the old maid who was in the garden saw it also, for she stood at the open window of the garret, by which hung the cage containing the linnet, who then had no water-glass, but was obliged to be contented with an old cup. In the window-sill stood a myrtle in a pot, and this had been pushed on a little on one side, that it might not fall out, for the old maid was leaning out of the window, that she might see it. And she did see distinctly the aeronaut in the balloon, and how he let down the rabbit in the parachute, and then drank to the health of all the spectators and the wine from the bottle. After doing this, he hurled it high into the air. How little she thought that this was the very same bottle with which her friend had thrown aloft in her honor, on that happy day of rejoicing in the green wood in her youthful days. The bottle had no time to think. When raised so suddenly, and before it was aware, it reached the highest point it had ever obtained in its life. Steeples and roofs lay far, far beneath it, and the people looked as tiny as possible. Then it began to descend much more rapidly than the rabbit had done, made somersaults in the air, and felt itself quite young and unfettered, although it was half full of wine. Get another track on. But this did not last long. What a journey it was! All the people could see the bottle, for the sun shone upon it. The balloon was already far away, and very soon the bottle was far away also, for it fell upon a roof and broke into pieces. But the pieces had got such an impetus in them that they could not stop themselves. They went jumping and rolling about, till at last they fell into the courtyard, and were broken into still smaller pieces. Only the neck of the bottle managed to keep whole, and it was broken off as clean as if it had been cut with a diamond. "That would make a capital bird's glass," said one of the cellarmen, but none of them had either a bird or a cage, and it was not to be expected they would be provided one just because they had found a bottleneck that could be used as a glass. But the old maid who lived in the garret had a bird, and it really might be useful to her, so the bottleneck was provided with a cork, and taken up to her, and, as it often happens in life, the part that had been uppermost was now turned downward, and it was filled with fresh water. That's pretty poetic. The part that had been uppermost was now turned downward, as it so often happens in life. Then they hung it in the cage of the little bird, who sang and twittered more merrily than ever. "Ah, you have good reason to sing," said the bottleneck, which was looked upon as something very remarkable, because it had been in a balloon. Nothing further was known of its history. As it hung there in the bird's cage, it could hear the noise and murmur of the people in the street below, as well as the conversation of the old maid in the room within. An old friend had come just to visit her, and they talked, not about the bottleneck, but of the myrtle in the window. "No, you must not spend $1 for your daughter's bridal bouquet," said the old maid. "You shall have a beautiful little bunch for a nosegay, full of blossoms. Do you see how splendidly the tree has grown? It has been raised from only a little sprig of myrtle that you gave me on the day after my betrothal, and from which I was to make my own bridal bouquet when a year had passed. But that day never came. The eyes were closed which were to have been my light and joy through life. In the depths of the sea my beloved sleeps sweetly. The myrtle has become an old tree, and I am still an older woman. Before the spring you gave me faded, I took a spray and planted it in the earth. And now, as you see, it has become a large tree, and a bunch of the blossoms shall at last appear at a wedding festival, in the bouquet of your daughter. There were tears in the eyes of the old maid, as she spoke of the beloved of her youth, and of their betrothal in the wood. Many thoughts came into her mind, but the thought never came that quite close to her, in that very window, was a remembrance of those olden times. The neck of the bottle which had, as it were, shouted for joy when the cork flew out with a bang on the betrothal day. But the bottleneck did not recognize the old maid. He had not been listening to what she had related, perhaps because he was thinking so much about her. And that's the story. The bottleneck. They didn't even realize they got reunited. That's crazy. Very interesting story. I've definitely read other Brother Grimm where the main character is an inanimate object, but this one really went with it. It does make you think about all the alcoholic beverage glasses that we've ever had and which ones might be extra special for us. All right. We'll do one more for tonight. We'll have a little intermission here just for 1 second before we do one more for tonight. Get that back up. Want another sad one? Oh, sorry, that's probably loud. You want another sad one? Let's see if I can find another sad one. Should be good. The old beggar woman sounds pretty sad. Oh, that's really short. Poor boy in the grave. That sounds pretty bad. That sounds pretty sad. Another one. All right. I'm sorry, it's too loud. I gotta keep changing. I'm trying to make this not too loud. Okay. I guess it's better. One more. Another one. One more. The poor boy in the grave. And I'll get another track on. There was once a poor shepherd boy whose father and mother were dead, and he was placed by the authorities in the house of a rich man, who was to feed him and bring him up. The man and his wife had, however, bad hearts, and were greedy and anxious about their riches, and vexed whenever anyone put a morsel of their bread in his mouth. The poor young fellow might do what he liked. He got little to eat, but only so many blows the more. One day he had to watch a hen and her chickens, but she ran through a quick-set hedge with them, and a hart darted down instantly and carried her off through the air. The boy called, "Thief! Thief! Rascal!" with all the strength of his body. But what good did that do? The hawk did not bring its prey back again. The man heard the noise and ran to the spot, and as soon as he saw that his hen was gone, he fell in a rage, and gave the boy such a beating that he could not stir for 2 days. Then he had to take care of the chickens without the hen, but now his difficulty was greater, for one ran here and the other ran there. He thought he was doing a very wise thing when he tied them all together with a string, because then the hawk would not be able to steal any of them away from him. But he was very much mistaken. After 2 days, worn out with running around and hunger, he fell asleep. The birds of prey came and seized one of the chickens, and as the others were tied fast to it, it carried them all off together, perched itself on a tree, and devoured them. The farmer was just coming home, and when he saw the misfortune, he got angry and beat the boy so unmercifully that he was forced to lie in bed for several days. When he was on his legs again, the farmer said to him, "Thou art too stupid for me. I cannot make a herdsman of thee. Thou must go as errand boy." Then he sent him to the judge, to whom he was to carry a basket full of grapes, and he gave him a letter as well. On the way, hunger and thirst tormented the unhappy boy so violently that he ate 2 of the bunches of grapes. He took the basket to the judge, but when the judge had read the letter and counted the bunches, he said, 2 clusters are wanting. The boy confessed quite honestly that, driven by hunger and thirst, he had devoured the 2 which were wanting. The judge wrote a letter to the farmer, and asked for the same number of grapes again. These also the boy had to take to him with a letter. As he again was so extremely hungry and thirsty, he could not help it, and again ate 2 bunches. But first he took the letter out of the basket, put it under a stone, and seated himself thereupon in order that the letter might not be seen and betray him. The judge, however, again made him give him an explanation about the missing bunches. "Ah," said the boy, "how have you learnt that?" "Yeah, make some tea, make some sleepy time tea." The letter could not know about it, for I put it under a stone before I did. The judge could not help laughing at the boy's simplicity, and sent the man a letter wherein he cautioned him to keep the poor boy better, and not let him want for meat and drink, and also that he was to teach him what was right and what was wrong. "I will soon show thee the difference," said the hard man. "If thou wilt eat, thou must work, and if thou dost anything wrong, thou shalt be quite sufficiently taught by blows." The next day he set him for a hard task. He was to chop 2 bundles of straw for food for the horses, and then the man threatened. "In 5 hours," he said, "I shall be back again, and if the straw is not cut to chaff by that time, I will beat thee until thou canst not move a limb." The farmer went with his wife, the manservant, and the girl, to the yearly fair, and left nothing behind for the boy but a small bit of bread. The boy seated himself on the bench, and began to work with all his might. As he got warm over it, he put his little coat off and threw it on the straw. In his terror lest he should not get done in time, he kept continually cutting, and in his haste, without noticing, he chopped his little coat as well as the straw. He became aware of the misfortune too late. There is no repairing it. "Ah," he cried, "now all is over for me. The wicked man did not threaten me for nothing. If he comes back and sees what I have done, he will kill me. Rather than that, I will take my own life." The boy had once heard the farmer's wife say, "I have a pot with poison in it under my bed." She, however, had only said that to keep away greedy people, for there was honey in it. The boy crept under the bed, brought out the pot, and ate all that was in it. "I do not know," said he. "Folks say death is bitter, but it tastes very sweet to me. It is no wonder that the farmer's wife had so often longed for death." He seated himself in a little chair, and was prepared to die. But instead of becoming weaker, he felt himself strengthened by the nourishing food. It cannot have been poison, thought he, but the farmer once said there was a small bottle of poison for the flies in the box in which he keeps his clothes. That, no doubt, will be the true poison. It will bring death to me. It was, however, no poison for flies, but Hungarian wine. The boy got out the bottle and emptied it. "This death tastes sweet too," said he. But shortly after, when the wine began to mount into his brain and stupefy him, he thought his end was drawing near. "I feel that I must die," said he. "I will go away to the churchyard and seek a grave." He staggered out, reached the churchyard, and laid himself in a newly dug grave. He lost his senses more and more. In the neighborhood was an inn where a wedding was being kept. When he heard the music, he fancied he was already in paradise, until at length he lost all consciousness. The poor boy never awoke again. The heat of the strong wine and the cold night dew deprived him of life, and he remained in the grave in which he had laid himself. Damn! This is a sad one. When the farmer heard the news of the boy's death, he was terrified, and afraid of being brought to justice indeed. His distress took such a powerful hold of him that he fell fainting to the ground. His wife, who was standing on the hearth with a pan of hot fat, ran to him to help him. But the flames darted against the pan. The whole house caught fire. In a few hours it lay in ashes. And the rest of the years they had to live, they passed in poverty and misery, tortured by the pangs of conscience. Damn. That's it. That's the end. So poor kid was an orphan, got sent to a farmer. The farmer just beat him all the time. Kid tried to kill himself, and he did. And then the farmer's house burned down, and they lived in poverty. That's a sad one. That's the sad one. That's the sad one you wanted, right? That's the sad one. That's the sad one we wanted. There it is. Jeez. Jeez. Yeah, right? That's how like half of these are. This mic is very sensitive. Alright, well that's all for tonight. We're right about at the 2-hour mark. Nobody lives happily ever after. No. Apparently not. That's crazy. Well, in an effort to reach the 2-hour mark, these last 2 minutes, take a quick look at, was it this one? No. Yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. Hope we have a good night. We sleep well. Sleep well tonight. The Old Beggar Woman. Very short, last one for 2 hours. There's once an old woman, but thou hast surely seen an old woman go a-begging before now. This woman begged likewise, and when she got anything, she said, "May God reward you." The beggar woman came to a door, and there by a fire a friendly rogue of a boy was standing warming himself. The boy said kindly to the poor old woman as she was standing shivering thus by the door, "Come, old mother, and warm yourself." She came in, but stood too near the fire, so that her old rags began to burn, and she was not aware of it. The boy stood and saw that, but he ought to have put the flames out. Is it not true he ought to have put them out? And if he had not new water, then should he have wept all the water in his body out of his eyes, and that would have supplied 2 plenty streams with which to extinguish them. What? I don't know. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I hope we have a good night. Sleep well.